The Jewish Channel's Week in Review. Israeli-Palestinian peace talks seem to be on the horizon. Barbra's story comes to the stage, quilting the Jewish tradition, and more of the Jewish news that's changing your world right now in this episode of the Week in Review. Hello and welcome to the Jewish Channel's Week in Review. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. Peace talks are likely coming. Secretary of State John Kerry announced Friday that Israeli and Palestinian leaders have reached an agreement that, quote, establishes a basis for resuming direct final status negotiations between Palestine and Israel. This comes amid a trip in which Kerry has met multiple times with Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and other regional leaders. PA spokesperson Abu Rudaina reportedly said, quote, certain details, unquote, still needed to be ironed out, but, quote, if things go well, Kerry will extend an invitation to Saeb Erekat, the Palestinian negotiator, and the representative on the Israeli side to meet him in Washington to hold primary talks in the coming few days. Israeli Justice Minister Tzipi Livni, who under the new Israeli government is responsible for handling the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, said in a statement, quote, these past few months were long, filled with doubt and cynicism, but now 4 years of political stagnation are coming to an end. Hamas, which controls Gaza, criticized the agreement in a statement, saying, this negotiation will be useless. It is not going to achieve anything for the Palestinian people. It will not help the prisoner issue, the border issue, or the land issue. Of course, this won't be the first time that peace talks have started between Israel and Palestine in recent years, or that they have been engineered by the administration of President Barack Obama to take place in Washington, or between Netanyahu and Abbas under those same circumstances. Indeed, almost precisely the same thing occurred just 3 years ago in September of 2010. Those talks ended quickly without any noticeable progress. It is perhaps for that reason that White House spokesperson Jay Carney was quite reserved in describing the agreement, saying that the president has a, quote, very cautious attitude toward that latest development, emphasizing that, quote, we're at a stage here that represents some positive progress, but is not representative of a conclusion of anything. There are key differences between 2010 and now that could lead to different results. In the first place, the Palestinian Authority has shown that it can press its hand in the international sphere and get results, as it did by winning recognition of Palestine as an observing member state in the United Nations General Assembly. While support for Netanyahu's diplomatic approach in the international community has dwindled greatly in recent years, the talks also come at a time when both Israel and Palestine are dealing with great uncertainty on their borders due to regional conflicts in Syria and Egypt and the spillover of those into Jordan and elsewhere. Solidifying international alliances, aid, and promises of protection from larger military powers is thus particularly helpful for both at this moment. And this also comes just after Hamas has seen itself considerably weakened by the coup against Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi and by the conflict in Syria, which puts the PA in a position of greater strength. Within Israel itself, Netanyahu leads a very different governing coalition than he did in 2010. His government is much less composed of his fellow partisans, as Livni and Yair Lapid won significant places in the elections earlier this year. At the same time, Netanyahu's own party, though smaller in number, has drifted quite a lot farther to the right in the past year. This means it's both easier for Netanyahu to sell a deal to his overall government and harder to sell it to his own party. But while we wait to see if Israel will be producing peace, its cultural exports continue to climb. Christian Neen reports on an exhibition of Israeli quilts.
Take a close look at the art on this wall. The colors you see were not painted on. Rather, they were quilted, and this style of art quilting has now reached Israel. I visited the Art Quilt Gallery NYC on 25th Street in Manhattan in the midst of a show of work by Israeli art quilter Maya Haimovich, which ends August 2nd. Haimovich gave me a tour of her work and shared the inspiration behind various quilts, an art form she began working on after a trip to New England.
It's very new art in Israel, and I discovered it only 20 years ago. By chance, we were traveling in New Hampshire. We arrived to a big shop of quilt and fabrics, and it was amazing to me.
Before turning to quilting, Haimovich worked with everything from embroidery to jewelry to woodcraft. And since the first solo exhibition of her art quilts in Columbus, Ohio in 2006, Haimovich has been perfecting her approach. A good example is her quilt titled Bud, or Nitzan in Hebrew.
My way of quilting is free motion machine quilted. And I use metal thread and multicolor thread for this because I like that it will be shown, and I like it very, very bright. And I like also the shape of it because it's like you throw a stone to the water, or if you cut the wood, you can see this shape. And also in topographic map, you see this shape. And the most important thing that it's the shape you have on fingerprint.
To see more from Travelogue, the new art quilt exhibition by Maya Haimovich, on display at the Art Quilt Gallery NYC through Friday, August 2nd, please tune into the full broadcast edition of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Christian. It can be taken as a given that the average fan of the theater is also a fan of Barbra Streisand, and vice versa. Imagining the explosion of enthusiasm for a theatrical production about Babs might be too difficult to contemplate, but Meredith Gansman contained her enthusiasm long enough to file a report on just such a production.
Have you ever wanted to meet Barbra Streisand? You know I do. Well, what about spend, 95 minutes or so inside her home? I know, it sounds too good to be true. And maybe that's the essence of this great story and a great time that you can spend with your favorite funny girl off Broadway. Streisand's first book, My Passion for Design, takes the reader inside her lavish home, including pictures of the property, photographed chiefly by the author herself. The book caught the attention of playwright Jonathan Tolins and inspired a story, a fictional comedy, so steeped in fact, it's hard to believe it's not real.
The show is all based on one joke, that she has this mall in her basement, which is true, and the joke is she hires someone to work down there. The second part wouldn't be that funny if the audience didn't understand that there really is a mall in her basement.
And it's with this introduction that Jonathan Tolins' off-Broadway one-man show, Buyer and Cellar, starring Michael Urie, who you may remember from the television show Ugly Betty, begins.
In one section of the museum, they recreated all these little stores. A china shop, a country store, just the way they would have looked in the early 1800s. And then they used them to display various collections. Wouldn't it be fun to do something similar? Wouldn't it? So that's what she did. She built a shopping mall in her basement. Remember, this is the part that's real.
And then on to the fun and fantastic portion of the show. Urie plays Alex Moore, a down-on-his-luck actor in California hired to work for Barbra Streisand.
But what's the greatest compliment that I get is when people say they felt like they spent time with her. Because I'm not doing an impression. I don't look like her. I don't put on any wigs or clothes or nose or nails or anything like that. I just try to emulate her.
My stepfather used to tell me I couldn't have ice cream because I was too ugly.
Yeah, well, now you have your own frozen yogurt machine, so
And that to me is what makes her so appealing, because I'm a Jewish kid who was born in Brooklyn. So I feel like this kind of connection, like Barbara's kind of mishpucha, you know?
To see more from Barbra Streisand's basement in Buyer and Cellar, tune in to the full broadcast version of the Week in Review.
Thank you, Meredith. Finally, speaking of personal enthusiasms, TJC viewers will recall how I've frequently spoken with guests about the need for better access to Jewish texts in the age of the internet. Author Joshua Foer is hoping to provide just that with his new project, Safaria, a website and mobile app building block in which he's teamed with a Google engineer to open up Jewish text to the masses at no cost to those who want to learn. He recently stopped by TJC Studios for an interview, and here are the highlights. So this project is something that touches upon something that we've talked about a lot here on the Jewish channel, something I've written about in the past, that I think is probably one of the most important contributions that could be made to Jewish culture today, which is the democratizing of Jewish text, finally taking all these Jewish texts that are not in copyright and saying, let's put them out there, and let's put them out there in a way that people can manipulate in whatever way they choose.
Yeah, you basically just described the mission of the project, right, which is to make the Jewish textual tradition available to as many people as possible, lower barriers to entry, and do it in a way that is free, interconnected, and in the public domain.
And why hasn't this happened so far?
It's a great question. I mean, me and my co-founder, Brett Lockspizer, came to this project out of a deep frustration that it hadn't happened before. Brett led the team at Google that created the Google News Archive. And that's a massive technological project. Putting the entire Jewish canon online is something that we could have done 10 years ago and should have done 10 years ago. It's 2013. It's appalling that you cannot find a copy of the Mishnah online in English in translation. That's appalling. That should be a shame. That should be a collective shame of the Jewish people. And so one of the things that that was sort of one of the first projects we tackled was creating an open source free translation of the Mishnah online, harnessing the power of hundreds of contributors around the world, people who are engaged with Jewish texts, doing translations to make those translations available for everybody in perpetuity.
Explain, for the purpose of our viewers' understanding, what is the difference between what your project brings to the table and what, for example, HebrewBooks.org or some of the other projects that have images of these books that you can go and you can find a scanned image of any page of the Talmud very easily, but finding it in the format that you're developing it is very difficult.
Yeah, so HebrewBooks.org is an incredible resource, and what they've done in terms of scanning and digitizing Jewish books is fantastic. What we're trying to do is actually take our textual heritage, I want to say almost back to its original modality. Right? The Jewish canon is not, in a way, a collection of books on a bookshelf. It's one gigantic conversation of individuals commenting on other individuals, texts commenting on other texts. It's a gigantic interconnected web. And what we're doing is, by bringing these texts back into that kind of a format, is we like to think we're returning them to the mode in which they were originally created. You want to be able to jump from text to text to text to text without getting up and pulling a different book off your bookshelf. By making this all free and machine understandable, we are creating what's known as an API, which is essentially a language that any other computer program can use to pull texts from our tradition. And our hope is that by making that available, making it free for anybody to use, we're going to see that we are planting the seeds for flowers that we have no idea what they will bloom like. That people will create new projects online, whether it's educational games or educational software or things that we can't even imagine yet, using the basic infrastructure, the core technology that we're making available. We're trying to open up Jewish learning, Jewish study, textual work, to democratize it, make it available for everyone in as easy to use a format as possible.
You can see the full interview with Joshua Foer in the interviews category under TJC Original Series on the Jewish Channel on demand on cable. That's all for this week. From all of us here at the Jewish Channel, be well. The Jewish Channel is available on cable. Time Warner Cable Channel 528, IO Optimum Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, Cox Cable Channel 1, Frontier Communications, and on Comcast in the on-demand menu under Premium Channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.